All right, I think everyone from the waiting room is on their way in. So Amanda, you're welcome to take it away.
Yeah, so I'll let people just kind of come in a little bit more. I think everybody is here. Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Amanda Rawson. Some of you know who I am, some of you don't, so it's nice to meet you. I am a core team member of the community-driven group San Jose Arts Advocates. So San Jose Arts Advocates is a collaborative project by the San Jose creative community dedicated to education, advocacy, and action to support arts and culture in San Jose. I am super excited to welcome you all to this evening's program, Dinner and the Budget, where our San Jose Arts Advocate colleague, and happens to be my husband, Brendan Rawson, will be talking with the City Budget Director, Jim Shannon, about the current budget process and our advocacy priorities for the fiscal year 2022 and 23. So conversations are happening now at the city about the upcoming budget and the priorities, which is why tonight's conversation is an important one to have. Brendan and others in the hospitality and tourism and arts and culture fields recently wrote a letter with together on the current status of the transient occupancy tax, also known as the TOT, which supports the many arts and culture workers and organizations in our city. So the letter has been shared throughout the sector in San Jose, and it will also be shared through the San Jose Arts Advocates email. I hope all of you have your dinner in front of you or prepping it and are ready with a notepad and pen in hand, because you'll have the opportunity to learn about the budget and ask your questions after listening to a presentation from our guest, City Budget Director Jim Shannon. So we'd like you to submit your questions via the chat and we will read them out loud. If it is a question that might be a bit too long, please use the raise hand option and we will call on you. I'm going to now pass the mic to Brendan.
Okay, right on. Thanks, Amanda. So the idea here was to be some conversational, so I hope folks do have questions. I did have a couple of questions for Jim after his presentation to get us going, but I'm hoping that folks will have questions for Jim that you'll be able to moderate and bring folks forward through the evening. I did also want to just acknowledge, my fellow colleagues, as Amanda was saying, we have as part of our Arts Advocates core team, Yori and Dana Seeger with the School of Visual Philosophy. Julia Canavis is also on here as part of the core team. Mighty Mike McGee, Peter, and this, my thing just changed here, so I lost all my list of names, but it's there we go. There's some of us, just so folks get to know each other. So this is kind of who we are, and we'll talk later too about what San Jose Arts Advocates is all about and how folks can be involved. But tonight, this is a great, I'm looking forward to this conversation. This is fun to have Jim joining us. Really appreciate him taking the time. Jim has actually been budget director for City of San Jose. He's been on board with the City of San Jose for 10 years. So it must be an interesting ride over that 10 years of budget related issues. So a lot of background and history there that he'll be able to bring to the conversation. I did notice that, Jim, in your background, there was USDA smuggling, interdiction, and trade compliance. That's probably for another conversation, but
very quite the bio there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. UC Davis Aggie and San Francisco State Master's Public Administration, also that as part of Jim's background. So if you ever seen Jim work with City Council, it's always a wonderful capacity and ability to synthesize really complex questions and inquiries about the city budget. And so feel very fortunate for him taking the time. So to start off, we're gonna turn it over to Jim. He's gonna be able to give us a bit of an overview, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction, Brent. I didn't realize they shared with you my whole resume, so that's fun. Yeah. So fun fact: most people in the budget office actually were not. We don't have a finance background typically, so it's interesting. We have a couple of us do, but so my original background was biology, from UC Davis. But Margaret McCann, the director right before me, was a UC Berkeley grad in English. And then Jennifer McGuire, our current city manager, was a psychology major, I believe, who was also the budget director before Margaret. So takes all kinds here to be in the budget office. So at the heart, though, we are all analysts and are familiar with numbers, even though we're not accountants or necessarily have a finance background. So let me go ahead and share my screen if I can, since I think it is
Try again. I set it up. So that you-
this guy. I always get my that
Yeah.
right. You see, this is
Yeah.
it, right?
You're
All you
good.
see is the presentation. You don't see the swap. Okay, perfect. Well, yeah. So wanted to spend some time tonight to chat about. You know, I never changed the actual title. Sorry, guys. I pinched a lot of these slide decks from a presentation I gave, a City Council study session on January 14th. It has sort of a much bigger snapshot of kind of where the budget process is. So I didn't get my title right here, but I think I got the rest of the content is good here. So want to just set a little bit of context of sort of where we are in the budget process. Talk a little bit of the history about the city's budget, particularly the general fund, since I did see a copy of the letter that you folks have circulated. So wanted to let you know also what the council is thinking of as they're going through their budget process. And I'm here tonight definitely to answer sort of all the technical questions, and all the policy calls is for council to make, but can kind of give you sort of a flavor of the things that we've been talking to them about, so that will inform you in the budget process as we go forward here. So we'll just go over the timeline, which I think you guys know pretty well, but just wanted to know the different swim lanes that we have for the budget process. You know, so we have on the community side, you know, all throughout from sort of October, I mean, you know, all this really happens year round, is where the community is communicating to the council and the city about what's important to them, you know, where the priorities sit. It gets a little bit more formalized as we get into January and March. You know, the mayor does conduct a budget town hall. I think Brendan was there because I know he emailed me after that, where we try to understand where to get some perspective of the community about what their priorities might be in the upcoming process. There's also surveys that go out. There's informal surveys on the internet. There are formal surveys done by our office and the auditor's office to understand where the community priorities are. That culminates into the mayor's budget message, which is happening tomorrow, as you all know. And so that really sets the big policy direction for how the budget should be shaped. That mayor's March message not only is informed by the conversation with the community, with other council priorities, but it's also informed by our 5-year forecast that we released right at the end of February, which sort of gives the council perspective, especially in the general fund, which is where, you know, the general fund is pretty much the only, I mean, there's maybe a couple others, but it's the largest source of revenue that can be used for any governmental purpose. And so we talk a lot about the general fund, even though it's, you know, it's only about 25% or so of the city's overall $5.1 billion budget. But we do, you know, because it can be used for any purpose, that's why we talk a lot about it, because there's a lot of trade-offs that are involved there. And so, you know, once the mayor's March message gets approved, we go forth as the administration and put together a proposed budget, and that gets released at the beginning of May. And then we've got study sessions and that happen all throughout May. We have community budget meetings. There are a variety of managers' budget addenda, which we issue in response to council questions, in response to new information. And then the culmination of all those MBAs, excuse me, the discussion of the study sessions, community feedback results in an adopted budget that gets passed at the end of June, which is like, hey, here's a proposed budget and all these changes, and now we have an adopted budget. So that's a super simplified process. I got it spelled out in a lot more detail, but I don't want to get too involved in the weeds, and make sure we have plenty of time for questions. But to give a little perspective of sort of where the city's budget has been, because that really informs us where it is now and sort of the choices that the council is presented with. So on the revenue side in the general fund, you know, we are primarily driven, you know, how goes sales tax and property tax goes the rest of the general fund. And so what this slide shows is some interesting information about, you know, we had, the .com bust, which was, you know, had that downward slope there on the sales tax side. And on the Great Recession, we also had a pretty significant dip in the sales tax, but it's grown pretty well since then, right? We also had a ballot measure that kicked in starting in 2017, 2018, the Measure B sales tax measure that helped this out too. So that was good news. On the property tax side, not so much in the dot-com bust, but really, or our data kind of gets weird going beyond 04, 05. So it's kind of hard to talk about because of the different allocations of how the county captures property tax. But what was really hard for us in property tax during the Great Recession is that property tax went down. Property tax doesn't go down. Not since World War II has property tax revenues gone down. Often there's slower growth, but normally it doesn't actually go down. So that was a huge blow to the city because we rely. This is about almost 25% of our general fund budget is property tax. So to have that revenue go down was really tough. But again, it has gone back up. So that's definitely positive news there. But one of the things that, even though that revenue is going up, we are challenged as a city, and you may have heard this from time to time, but on a per capita basis, we have pretty low revenue, especially for a big city. So when we think about our sales tax and our property tax, we don't do as well. Here's San Jose over here, compared to a lot of our South Bay colleagues. And that's because generally San Jose is the only big city in America where we have a smaller daytime population than a nighttime population. So normally in a big city, people come into the big city and work, and they go home and they sleep somewhere else. San Jose, by and large, is different. So we have, long been a sort of a bedroom community for the rest of the South Bay area, and that has implications on property taxes. A lot of the business activities and the corporate taxes associated with jobs, there's a net sort of flow out of the city. Which is why the council always talks a lot about having a jobs to housing balanced ratio. Totally the focus on affordable housing, but always sort of that little thought process when we go to private development and looking about land use decisions, trying to get a balanced jobs to housing ratio. So that's just interesting context there. Also applies on a property tax basis. So we definitely have a smaller revenue per capita on our property tax side too. So just some context about the revenue estimates and how sort of we compare maybe to our colleagues and what that may mean for us. Now on the expense side, while we've seen good revenue growth, this is all good news here, right? This is definitely good news. But on the expense side, we had expense growth while at the same time, and I'm sure you folks have been around San Jose for a while. So the retirement contributions that the city of San Jose is responsible for really went up dramatically over the last 20-year period. So back in 2000, 2001, about 6.5% of our general fund budget was dedicated to retirement costs. Now it's about 22%. Good news is it's going to go down in the later years, but that was, so was a really tough. So not only, we had other costs go up too, salary costs and healthcare costs and some other things, quite a bit. But this was a big one where we sort of were in existential crisis mode when you saw this spike peaking. So that's why we had sort of all those issues with retirement and Measure B for the retirement reform issue, where we implemented a tier 2 structure. We since sort of codified that with our Measure F in 2016, such that we got to a stable. So it's high, but it's stable. So so we sort of figured this out and really did a lot of hard work as a city, as a community with labor groups to get to sort of a flat line. But so we for a while though, we've been stuck here at this sort of high percentage of the general fund budget on retirement costs, and that has implications for us. We had a couple other things, on the expense, but that was outside of our control. So during the Great Recession and earlier, the state of California had several revenue takeaways that impacted us. We did open a lot of new facilities. So we did have a few general obligation revenue bonds, like to build new libraries and public safety facilities and parks. Those were great, but they have operations and maintenance costs associated with those. And so we had to make sure that we had O&M. For a while there, we couldn't open those because we didn't have the money to operate them. Now they are all fully open and operational. So what that meant was, challenging revenue per capita, retirement pressure, other cost pressures meant that we had this sort of, we call this a decade of deficits, where, for 2003 through 2012, we had a lot of challenges in the general fund to overcome. Fun fact, 2013, this is when I started with the city. I used to be really proud of this bar here because that's when I started, but Then, of course, we had the pandemic happen. And so over the last 20 years, we've had to resolve $800 million of general fund shortfalls. So even when we kind of got ourselves sort of righted, it's not like we had a lot of capacity in the general fund to sort of make up for lost ground. And so we had sort of this stable period from 2013 to right before the pandemic of some stability, but not a lot of adding back of services that were cut. And we did cut a lot of services. I mean, I don't want to go into all that, but, we had to lay off a lot of city employees. We did pay cuts. We did, service reductions and parks and public safety and lots of stuff. So righted the ship. Then we had to deal with the pandemic, and that's been challenging, but we're turning the corner on that as well. But that also meant that we had, pretty significant level of service, cuts. And one way to kind of represent that is our budgeted positions. So this is at an all funds level, but it kind of gives you an idea of back in 2001, 2002 was our peak staffing of 7,481 positions. And then at our trough, we had about 5,400 positions. And so even in 21, 22, we're at 6,600 positions. So we're well below where we were 20 years ago, and our population has grown quite a bit since then. So that's, so it's tough. So obviously there's a lot of services that we want to sort of add back that were cut, but it's challenging for us because we have lower staffing levels to provide those services. Now, that's not to say we would do the same things. We do business differently now in 21, 22 than we did in 01, 02. So it's not like it's a 1-for-1 reduction here, but just gives a sense of the scale of sort of what the city has gone through over the past 20 years. Okay, so then looking at the general fund forecast, and I appreciated Brendan sending me some emails on this because that meant people read it. And I always appreciate when people read all these documents that we write. So I really like that. So definitely objectively good news. This forecast is objectively good news for the general fund. I think what we talk about in the forecast document there is the economic growth recovered more quickly than nearly anybody had anticipated. And the types of economic activity that recovered were the things that drive a lot of revenue into the general fund, in particular sales tax, right? So people are buying more things that are taxable. So for a long time, I have a cool graph that's not in here, but it kind of shows that taxable goods as a percentage of GDP is shrinking until the pandemic, because we weren't doing as much in buying services, we were buying taxable goods. And so that's definitely helped us, where the valley. So even though the recovery has impacted people very unevenly, and those folks that were disadvantaged at the beginning are certainly even more disadvantaged now, but because we are the valley and a lot of folks work from home, there is certainly some revenue gain because of that. And so those are good news. So, right, so we have, and the real estate market was never really significantly impacted. So property tax remained strong, sales tax remained strong. So that was, or, it had a dip, but then it came back. So that's all good. Compounded with that is that we had really, really, really strong returns in our retirement system for 2021. So we had returns of over 25% in our retirement systems. What that means is that we had this sort of big unfunded actuarial liability for our retirement system. That's why you saw that spiking graph for retirement costs. But now that we have more cash in the system, that is lowering our future contributions to pay off that UAL, unfunded actuarial liability. So going forward, because we have more cash in the system, assuming all of the future assumptions are met for a rate of return of like 6 5/8%, we're going to have lower retirement costs in the future, if that holds true. So if everything holds true throughout the rest of this 5-year forecast, we've got sort of rising revenues and we've got decreasing retirement costs. And we haven't seen that in forever. I mean, not since the 90s probably, or I don't even know when. So those are, new things for us. So what that means here then is that in every year of the next 5 years, we're going to see an incremental surplus in the general fund. So for example, right now we've got 27.7 million projected of revenues in excess of general fund projected expenditures. In 23-24, we would get an additional 26 million. So what that means is that if we spent all this $27.7 million on new services in 22-23, everything goes according to the forecast, we can spend a new additional 26 million in 23-24, a new 23.5 in 24-25, right? So over the 5-year period, it's about $129 million. Now, the out years, it's not exact. It's really just more to put it in perspective of how things are kind of looking in the out years. But if I put that in context too of the percentage of the general fund budget, it's not that big. I mean, it's, we have a $1.6 billion general fund budget. And so, it's a pretty small, and on an ongoing basis, it's about 1.3 billion. So it's a pretty small percentage of that, but objectively good news, objectively good news. But I'm going to caveat that again, because my next slide is going to show it. But what this does not include, it doesn't include any services that are funded on a one-time basis in 21-22. It doesn't include any cost with any unmet deferred infrastructure or maintenance needs and any other one-time revenue source or expenditure needs that might pop up. And we had a lot of those in 21-22. And so the way we've been talking about the council on it, because there's a lot of trade-offs and choices that have to happen in this upcoming budget process. And we talked about this in the forecast. And so this is definitely on the top of council's minds. You guys should definitely know about it too, is we still carry a pretty significant service level shortfall when we think about some of these items. And so, but it's hard to kind of put it in perspective because, we had a lot of funding come in from the American Rescue Plan Fund, which was great. We had $212 million come in from the American Rescue Plan. Before that, we had the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which I think was another $170+ million. We've had other federal sources, we've had some state funding. So all good because the federal government responded very differently to this recession than they did to the Great Recession. So the stimulus then was not nearly enough. They might have overdid it a little bit for the pandemic, but there was much more risk to under rescue the economy than to under rescue it. So definitely there was a lot of money put into the system to help those who, especially in San Jose, that's how we used it, was primarily to help those who are our most vulnerable folks. But what that means though, is that we have a lot of work streams that were funded in the American Rescue Plan Fund on a one-time basis that aren't going to be able to continue. So when we think about some of the, you've probably heard of the Beautify San Jose program to provide trash collection services for our unhoused residents, doing abatements and doing some sort of clearing also. We have been, so that's about a $13 million ongoing program that's not part of our forecast. We've got, we've been spending through the end of June, we're projected to spend about $87 million on food distribution. So the city stood up at the beginning of the pandemic and took responsibility for coordinating the feeding programs throughout Santa Clara County. And so that role can't continue on. And so, so that's been a pretty big need. That's going to still kind of be out there. And then we have things like also things that are funded on a one-time basis in the general fund are things like Project Hope, are things like some police staffing, like a sworn hire ahead program for the police department. So a lot of needs that are out there on a one-time basis. So just to kind of put it in perspective for the council, we said, okay, well, if we just did 50% of what we allocated from the American Rescue Plan Fund in 21-22, that'd be about $50 million. And then if you looked at all the other things we funded on a one-time basis in the general fund, on a one-time basis, that's about $20 million. So if you kind of put that in perspective, you start with $27 million surplus, but then you kind of subtract the 50, subtract the 20. And so we really have, I mean, this $45 million is really just a representation of sort of the challenge that we kind of have to wrestle with of those services funded on a one-time basis in 21-22 that we got to deal with. So are we going to fund them at a lower level? Are we not going to fund them at all? And so those are the trade-offs that the March message sort of gives us some direction for, but will definitely be part of the conversation in the months ahead. Yeah, so, okay, so looking at the TOT in particular, and I'll try to wrap up here. So just, I think most of you folks know this, but just kind of put a little representation chart here. So of the 10% TOT tax that we get, 4% or 40%, so 4 percentage points of the 10% goes to the general fund. That's just part of our overall general fund revenues that gets mixed in with everything else that we have. But then 6% of that goes over to the TOT fund. Of that TOT fund, half of it goes to support convention facilities. So 3% of the 10% essentially kind of goes to, we transfer it to, you probably heard the Convention and Cultural Affairs Fund, Fund 536. That's about half of the TOT fund goes to support that work there. And then we got about 25% of what's in the TOT fund, or about 1.5% of the 10%, goes to the Convention and Visitors Bureau, which Team San Jose has that contract. And then 1.5% goes to cultural grants and administration. So 25% of the TOT fund. That's sort of the broad formula that's basically scoped out in the municipal code. The municipal code speaks to, you know, the 3% here, and then the rest is sort of split between the two of these here. But for historical purposes, it's always been the 1.5, the 1.5, and the 3 has been the basic approach here as we've gone through our many years with the TOT fund. And so looking at the TOT forecast, you know, we had this discussion, and this has been the hardest revenue category really for us to pin down, because it's been the most significantly impacted by the pandemic, and it's been the slowest to recover so far. And so we work actually with a couple of different economic consultants. We work with one in particular on TOT who specializes in hotel activity projections. They're forecasting sort of a more robust recovery than we feel comfortable budgeting, especially because the implications on the TOT special fund side. And so we don't want to, you know, we kind of got our butts kicked the last couple of years on the TOT, our initial TOT projections, because San Jose has typically kind of underperformed where the national market has been. I think Ben's on here, so he can probably speak to it too, but, you know, we're not really a vacation destination. So we're more of a business destination. So because we're tech sector heavy, you know, those activities have been slower to recover than maybe the national averages. So we're being pretty conservative. So we're having a much slower rate of growth for our TOT projections. So this is the 6% in the TOT fund. And you know, it's kind of a bummer because we don't really get back to our pre-pandemic level, which is over here at the 30.8. And then, you know, Brendan's like, hey, but what is adjusted for inflation? So we did that quick calc. And so, you know, by the end of the forecast period, if this holds true, you know, we would be about 26% below what our pre-pandemic peak was, adjusted for inflation. So, you know, it's certainly, so again, I think we're hopeful that we recover a little faster than this, but there's still a lot of uncertainty where the TOT fund lives. And so we want to be, you know, a little bit more cautious when we're doing our revenue projections for that fund. And so I think those are really the slides. I think there's a more Q&A that I'm happy to go into. You know, I do expect, I kind of missed this here, but part of our American Rescue Plan allocations in 21-22 was the city adopted was in support of the arts program. So I think we had $2 million of supplemental cultural arts grants to supplement the amount that was otherwise would have been in the TOT fund. And I believe there was an additional 1.2 million as part of our San Jose Abierto program to support sort of outdoor arts activation and festival programming. So, you know, there is direction. When you look at the March message, there is direction for the administration to evaluate all those items that were funded on a one-time basis in 21-22 to figure out, you know, what our recommendation would be in light of all the other council's priorities to bring forward the continuation of some of these items. So that will definitely be in, you know, the city's thought process as we get into 22-23 about the need to continue the support at some level. Anyway, those are my slides, and hopefully I left enough time for questions here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jim. That was great. I think it's wonderful way of framing all of the information for us. There's lots of things in there that I think we'll have questions on. Some of the things immediately coming to mind as you were describing that, like when you're mentioning, yeah, it's 26 +% off of where we were back in 18-19, and we're all hopeful that that recovery will come faster. I think for us as San Jose Arts Advocates and others, we're really kind of committed to, okay, well, we don't want to just hope. We want to put together a strategy that's going to see that return and be able to return revenue, sales tax, and TOT growth to the city. So I think that's a thrust of where our thoughts are and wanting to communicate, you know, some perspectives to the council. I think, as you said, you're focused on some of the mechanics of how all these things come together. And so I just want to, some grounding for folks that might still have a few questions. So we just mentioned for TOT, just real quickly for folks of understanding, that's tax applied to all hotel stays across the City of San Jose. And is there anything that you, in terms of just informing where those dollars come from, anything that you think we should be informed of when we hear that, oh, the TOT is this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, just like you said, so when you pay your room rate to the hotel, there's a 10% tax applied to that. So so straight up revenue. So if your room rate is $100, then it's an additional $10 that you would pay. That $10 goes to the City of San Jose. Of that $10, $6 of those dollars go to the TOT fund and 4% go to the general fund. And that's going to apply for business travelers, for vacation stayers, all that.
Okay. And you had mentioned there in terms of for historical purposes, and that this idea there's always been, this is what these proportions have been. And I know you yourself has been there at the city for 10 years, that's that sort of time frame. I'm kind of curious, do you know in terms of history around TOT sort of prior to that, going back to sort of Great Recession and .com bust, of changes that all happened in that manner of how things were apportioned?
I think that Muni Code's been in place since, I want to say the late 80s. I think that Muni Code has been in place then, so I would say that what the Muni Code specifies is that half of the TOT fund goes to support convention and cultural facilities. The other half is split between the CVB and the cultural arts. And so, traditionally we have then split that half 50-50. I think in 21-22 was the first time we actually took a little bit of CVB allocation, $1 million of the CVB allocation, and shifted that over to the arts programming, because they had a little bit of a balance in the CVB, which I think is mostly gone now. But that was sort of the only time we've really done something different than that, was for that. And I think I saw a thing pop up. So Airbnb is part of that. So the TOT does include the Airbnb portion too.
Okay. And part of my understanding too is on that remainder portion, that the 40% that's going to general fund. In years past, some things of part of city staffing, for example, that was related to Office of Cultural Affairs, was part of that component of the city's budget. When that those roles in the course of those years have changed, and that the city now covers those roles out of the TOT dollars, if I recollect correctly.
I think that's true. I think back when we were sort of trying to survive there, I think, there was a greater proportion of the cost to administer the cultural grants program was shifted into the TOT fund. And so that's certainly true. Maybe the other thing, which is interesting for you folks, is that the TOT, I mean, you kind of go back in time, and it's pretty surprising what the TOT did in the .com bust. I mean, we didn't get back to those levels for years. But when we did get back to our growth levels, the growth in TOT was pretty dramatic. And so certainly from the pre-pandemic peak of about 20 million or so, 38.8 million, that was a pretty steep rise over, let's say, the low part, 10 years previously of about, 10.5 million. So I think we have, when the TOT has risen, I think we did keep the cultural grants administration flat, and all the delta went toward the grants portion. But your point is very fair in that we did shift some of those costs over from the general fund into the TOT fund. But I don't know that breakout exactly, but you are right. Yeah.
Have you seen these become disconnected in this way? You kind of mentioned there, like sales and property tax, so goes general fund and the other sort of components of revenue streams to the city. Have you seen where TOT has sort of become disconnected in this fashion, when you're seeing sort of revenues coming in from, property taxes and sales taxes and TOT to sort of keep coming below expectations like this? Has there been a period like this before that you've seen?
Well, normally TOT overperforms sales tax and property tax. So I think the last couple of years have been the opposite, where TOT has underperformed. So I think it's the unique nature of how the pandemic has affected travel, because the normal growth period for TOT is double-digit percentage growth. That's its normal track. It's either, normally it's going down sharply or it's going up sharply. Normally it doesn't just hang out. It's normally which is good, except, the drops hurt. The drops don't happen very often, I think, but the pandemic, I mean, this has totally changed everything. I mean, the pandemic was, but that's So normally the TOT outperforms the rest of the general fund. The exception is these last couple of years where it's underperformed.
Okay. And then you mentioned that in terms of like the property tax makes up 25% of general fund and the other portions. And so TOT that goes to general fund, that's about 1%.
It's very small. Yeah, it's very small. And I think, you know, that's why that context that we talked about at the beginning is so important, because when you have because we had to cut so much and so deeply for years, sort of every $1 million count. We spent a lot of time in the budget office, you know, agonizing over, you know, a $10,000 base budget adjustment here and there, because that incremental change has become so important to us. So for sure, that 1%, that TOT is a very small percentage of the general fund budget, but as a percentage of our incremental forecast, it's really big. So if the $11 million that we have projected in the general fund for 22-23 were to just go to the TOT fund, right, that $27 million surplus drops to 16 million. That's how that would functionally work.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I want to make sure in terms of for dialogue and you know, conversation with others, if you know folks have questions that want to bring forward. That
We have a question.
Oh, okay.
There's a question in the chat. It says it's from a phone number. So how does the general fund and arts programs funding fit into traditional public access TV radio? I'm not sure how that.
Well, let's see.
Oh, and part 2, new media and social media.
Well, so there is, you know, I don't know it well off the top of my head, but we do have a franchise fee. So one of our general fund revenue categories is a franchise fee for several different utilities. One of them is on cable. And so there's a portion of the franchise fees that we get from cable taxes that goes to support our public education and government sort of account, and which sort of provides some funding for that program. I don't have it, you know, at the top of my head here about how the allocation. It's a little bit complicated about how that allocation works, but there is a portion of the general fund that goes over there. I don't want to give you a wrong number. I think it's, so I'll just have to get back to you because I don't want to put a wrong number on that gets recorded, but it's not related to the TOT fund. It's a slice of the cable franchise fee.
Okay. I think kind of related to that question, but first of all, I want to make sure that, you know, we know and we acknowledge that the public art behind you on the power plant down in South San Jose. Appreciate you having that screensaver.
Yeah. Artist Buster Simpson. Yeah. So when I started with the city, I started as a capital budget coordinator in the budget office. And so one of my responsibilities was, you know, doing the allocation calculations for the 1% for public art. So I always definitely an advocate for the 1%.
Yeah, so it's kind of where my question was headed, was that, you know, where else in the city budget does sort of support for arts, culture, programming sort of happen? Is there any others that folks should be sort of aware of?
So there's the public art that's in the capital program. And you can actually see what that amount is. If you look at the capital fund, if the adopted capital budget, I'm sure you guys all read that all the time. We have an attachment there for art in public places, which kind of gives a little summary of the arts funding for the TOT. I'm sorry, not the TOT. The 1% for public art. So for example, in 21-22, the budget for public art is 6.1 million. Yeah, so there's that. So it's in the 1% for public art. It's in the TOT fund there. I did mention a couple of items in the American Rescue Plan Fund. So we had the $2 million for the supplemental funding for just the arts grants, and I think another $1.2 million related to the outdoor activation space. And then we also have in the general fund also does support of some of the facilities like the San Jose Museum of Arts, the Tech Interactive, some of those other folks, the Children's Discovery Museum. So we spend in the general fund about $4 million or so supporting those groups and facilities on an annual basis.
Gotcha. That's great to know that those are in those other places. Kind of on the point you were describing there in terms of if this has been a really unique hit, the way the economy has turned for travel and sort of oriented to visitor sector things. I mean, how do you see this playing out for support for arts grants programs here over these this coming budget year or into the future? What's your thinking there of how the city is likely to do anything in support of this? Last year, as you said, sort of there was a backfill effort with one-time resources, some coming from federal dollars. Is there a sense at all that that you have of how this looks over the the 5 years that you said of no projection, or I don't know, how long do you think it would be before we got back to where we were back in 2018, 19?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm on rocky policy ground. So let me say that it definitely, that's a council call for how they want to address that. But I think though that, I mean, that TOT forecast, I mean, it's a forecast because it's in a forecast document. I don't pretend to say, and I tried to say that in our document, that is sort of a conservative budgeting placeholder for what the revenue will be. I think that that we still don't know really where TOT is going to be. So I view this, we had, when we adopted the 21-20-22 budget, we projected, I think at the time it was I think it was a $38 million shortfall. And we said, hey, there's still a lot of uncertainty what's going on here. So we're not going to recommend to you, City Council, to solve this all with ongoing solutions because one, we got a lot of money from the American Rescue Plan Fund to backstop us. Two, we're theoretically going to be coming out of the pandemic, so things might be better than we are anticipating. And so let's only solve a little bit of it on an ongoing basis. We'll use some one-time funding to get us through, and then we'll reassess as part of the next budget process, which I think was a good approach because things were quite a bit different than what we had projected back at this time last year. So I would expect something along the lines. I don't think we really know where TOT is going to be yet. And so we would probably, I don't think we have good long-term projections of where TOT is going to be. We're just coming out of the pandemic. Omicron is behind us. And so I would venture to guess that, we're going to need to take another look about how we think hotel activity is rebounding in San Jose in particular. Because I don't know if we have really great data yet about forecasting where we're going to go.
Great, thank you. I just want to see if there's other questions at all from others. I don't want to be hogging the conversation here.
It just looks like the person who was asking about the film and TV, public access TV, was asking, what is the city doing for arts in this way in regards to the public access TV? They mentioned, yes, Create TV was started with $6 million from a lawsuit that Comcast had to pay to the city of San Jose people to fund the public access station here. So did you want to add anything to that, Jim?
Oh, I may at the end here, because I did, oh, here we go. No, I probably can't speak. So I had been asking about the PEG because there's an item in the mayor's message around the Create TV, and I wanted to be a little smarter on how the revenue is allocated. But I'm not smart enough yet.
All right. So it sounds like the person who's asking the question, keep an eye out on attend the meetings, the forums, and the mayor's messages. Brendan, looks like there's a raised hand.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So,
Yeah. Go for it.
Yuri and Dana.
Jim, first, I just want to say thank you for your time. I definitely appreciate it. And also, to be totally transparent, I'm dyslexic and also sort of an arts person. And so I'm going to want to study these slides and really get into them and have a better response. But I do have a sort of a general question, which maybe you, if you can't answer, you can help direct towards that end. And so we understand then how the funds come in, we understand how they're being affected, and then how they're distributed into the arts groups and arts organizations. And myself being an artist and an owner of an arts business in San Jose, we really think that arts are the cultural background and backbone of the city. And it thrives in culture and it thrives in development. And so my question is, so these funds come in, what regulations and how do we get involved in the decision process of how that money is spent on a level that allows us to make those decisions going into the process, so that we build foundations in a way that protects and builds the cultures that we're developing and teaching and nurturing in our programs. And if you need me to elaborate, then I can get on a soapbox forever, but you know, our languages may be a little bit different, but you know, we're all talking about the same thing essentially. Is how do we understand how the funds are available, and then how do we use them the way that the culture and the city want to.
Yeah, no, that's really what the question is. And I think there's a pretty defined process for how the city has been allocating the traditional arts grants funding, where, you know, they have sort of a very defined process about how those grants are evaluated. I mean, thinking through the expansion of that to include other revenue sources, or really just increasing the dollar amounts available, is definitely, you know, that's the decision for the city council as they try to figure out where their priorities lie for all the things that they have to deal with and who they hear from. You know, it's probably, my sense is it's going to be a longer conversation, because I think there's still a lot of uncertainty that's out there. And I know that the council is going to hear it from a lot of different angles. I think you're at the right part of the process, though. I mean, the March budget message is what sets the tone for the big decisions for how the budget gets put together, right? So the council's approval tomorrow of that document is pretty impactful for how we go about and take our direction to put the budget together. You know, framing the conversation about, you know, the different types of investments, the different types of community that we want to build. And that to me sounds like a lot of hard work conversations with the council and the coalitions to put that together. But so I'm not your guy to answer that question, but I think you're at the right part of the process, which is the March budget message.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, being able to have a conversation with you so that I can go into those meetings with an education and feel like I'm at least able to communicate is a good point. So if I'm understanding correctly, it's, you know, talk to your council members and the council and put our opinions forward so they understand our community's wants and needs and how to drive that conversation if there are changes that we feel should be addressed.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think so. Our role as the administration in the city manager's office is to try to say, knowing what the council's priorities are, what's our best package to meet those priorities. And so, you know, we're not going to go recommend something radically different than what their priorities are, because we're not allowed to do that really. But you know, once those priorities are clear and directions given, then okay, how many levers can we pull to get to figure that out for them? Yeah. Excellent question.
We have Ben.
Again, thank you. Oh, sorry. Just saying again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ray. Ben, you can unmute yourself. Oh, can we unmute Ben? Great.
Okay, there we go. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Ben, what's up?
Doing well. Thanks so much for this and for the context, you know, helping to put it into the context of a larger, you know, budget picture with general fund. Just a question from an advocacy standpoint for the arts groups and everybody that signed on to that letter. I think some of the initial feedback that was received was that, you know, there were maybe some incorrect figures or anything listed within that letter. And I know there's the larger context around sort of prioritization of these one-time funded projects that are now probably looking for a home to live in general fund. Just curious though, as you've had an opportunity to look through the letter, was there anything that really stood out to you for being factually incorrect as stated in it? Just so that, you know, as the groups are moving forward for advocacy efforts, we make sure we're always presenting things as they actually are. Yeah,
I took a quick look. I didn't read it in the right depth. I didn't see anything when I, you know, was checking. I didn't see anything that was factually. I know I've heard that it, which is the challenge with our general fund forecast, is it doesn't really capture the needs out there. And so maybe folks were concerned that context was potentially missing. But Brendan sent me a note too. He's like, hey, Jim, is anything wrong with this? And I will look at that again just to see if there's anything technically wrong. But when I first glanced at it over the weekend, I didn't see anything.
Appreciate it.
We have another question in the chat. The question is, are there any new arts venues planned? Losing the Shannon Theater was such a loss for many smaller performing arts presenters in San Jose.
Yeah, none that I know of. I know that, we haven't even talked about the capital needs to maintain a lot of these facilities, which are pretty substantial. I know Ben knows that with the facilities that Team San Jose manages, but the Hammer Theater is an example of a theater that requires a lot of work. I mean, all of them sort of have their needs. So we would probably struggle to have a city-owned facility to operate. Would probably be a pretty big step since we do have a little bit of trouble making sure that we keep up with the capital of the existing city-owned facilities. But if there's a partnership or something else that was coming along, I'm sure folks would be listening.
Excellent. So we're coming up on the hour, Jim. But I just wanted to maybe just very concisely here with like, as this moves forward here from where we're at, like what's going on tomorrow and say in the next here in the next 2 months from if you were to summarize for community organizations and individuals, concerned about issues reflected in the budget, how folks or what folks need to know about.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. So tomorrow is review and hopefully approval of the mayor's March budget message. And so what that does is that gives direction. So this is actually required by the city's charter. So by the city's charter, the mayor owns the responsibility for giving direction to the city manager on how to prepare the proposed budget. So the March message gives us that direction with the major policy priorities. And then we go and once that's passed, take that information back and craft the 22-23 proposed operating budget and capital budget and fees and charges document, which we release. The capital gets released at the end of April. The operating gets released at the beginning of May. Same with the fees and charges document. So that's then the document's out there in the public realm. We have city council budget study sessions in the middle of May, where council can kind of get in the weeds there and ask some questions. We have a number of community budget meetings that I think the schedule is TBD. The mayor typically operates those. And so those, in the past couple of years, we've done them on Zoom. I'm not sure what his plan is for the current year, but I do anticipate there being a number of community budget meetings where it's an opportunity for Q&A with the mayor, as well as, to hear, from the community, how they're reacting to the proposed budget document. There also are a number of modifications so we start putting this budget together. I mean, we start getting proposals from departments in January. We do have to do a lot of prep work to sort of say, okay, here's what are the universes of things that you are thinking about, that the needs that are out there, marrying them to the direction, the March message, and sort of produce the document in May. But so there's going to be, a number of technical changes that we need to bring forward based on new information that we have, and any other changes to the proposed budget that might come up during the budget study sessions. And so we'll issue a number of memos for council's consideration. So then what happens is there's also a process. There's a really key process here that you guys probably are aware of. We do the mayor's March direction, you might notice, has an allocation of $3 million from the essential services reserve, which is held in reserve to be allocated by the city council later in the budget process to address urgent community needs. And so there's a process by which city council issues budget documents for the mayor's consideration on the potential spending of that essential services reserve and any other adjustments they want to recommend to the proposed budget. The mayor takes all that into consideration when he puts together his June budget message that says, hey, here, let's do some of these council budget documents, and let's do some of these changes proposed by the city manager, and that the cumulative sum of that becomes our adopted budget. And that June budget message gets heard on June, I want to say June 14th is when the June message gets heard. So that's a little ways away. But that'll be sort of the next big council decision point after March 15th will be June 14th.
Okay, excellent. Appreciate that overview. And it kind of one last question I think for me was I have to hear in the council some discussion sometimes makes reference to the idea that, well, on any given Tuesday, right, the council can do this or that, and some things are in charter and require certain processes, other things are not. With this type of issue of, like, say, the apportionment of TOT, to say that 40% goes to general fund, the ability of the city council to make a change in that apportionment and to say that they wanted to change that on an ongoing basis. Is there any things that prohibit the city council from making that decision?
Technical answer is no. So they can do anything they want to with general fund money. There are implications to that, to the rest of the general fund and to other parties they might want to fund, but there's nothing that technically prohibits the council from doing that. Now, in the current budget year, they can do that any given Tuesday. But what that means, though, is that that would unbalance the general. So let's say they wanted to, tomorrow, to move the general fund TOT in 21-22 and move that over to the TOT fund. That would mean that they gave that direction today, that we would have to unbalance the general fund. So we'd have to find ways in the general fund sort of to cut to be able to accommodate that $9 million transfer. When we do it as part of the upcoming budget process, so then, which is where we always want to have our ongoing allocations happen as part of the budget process. So by city council policy, all of the ongoing budgetary decisions should be made by as part of the proposed budget process. Now, council, I think, can not do their council policies, but they're really good about abiding by their city council policies. And so all of our budgeting policies really say any ongoing budgetary decisions need to be part of the budget development process.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I want to make sure we got you out of here on time. Appreciate you staying into the evening with us. So unless there was, Amanda, any other
no, there's no other questions, but we can do our last slide. We want to show that. I'll wait for Peter. There we go. Thanks, Peter. Great. So I just wanted to thank like to thank Jim Shannon again for joining us this evening, and to all of our team and all of you for joining us this evening, this last hour. And we know that was a lot of information to take in, but really important information. So as Peter mentioned in the chat, we will be able to share this. I'm sorry. This is a recorded session, so it's going to be available after today. But we also want you to connect with us and sign up for our newsletter at sjartsadvocates.org. Follow us on social media at San Jose Arts, and then also contact your council members. Show up for the public comments at the meetings. As was mentioned, there is a meeting tomorrow. If you can't make a comment, being present and connecting with us afterwards. If you have any questions, I think part of our work is to consistently be connected with our community and also be connected with the city council members. So I just want to thank everybody again for joining us, and we appreciate you being here. Good night.